Good to see you all once again. Appreciate the presence of each and every one of you. If you're visiting with us, please, we would encourage you to fill out one of our welcome cards. Our deacons can help you with that on the way out tonight, and just ask us to stick around for a few minutes after services so we can get to know you and introduce ourselves and help you in any spiritual way we can. If you want to open your Bibles to the book of Proverbs, that's where we're going to be at this evening. I will again try and get through this without a coughing fit. I am not actively contagious and need you all to know that. I'm just dealing with the tail end of the cold, and well, this cough just does not want to quit. But we'll get through it. As long as I don't get too hot up here, we should be good. Hopefully AC will kick on soon. There was one time I had gotten called into a situation. I was not the reason for the situation. It was me and an elder, and we had gone to this, it was another group in town. A young individual had made some poor choices, and we were trying to figure out a way to resolve it. And this other congregation, their preacher gifted this young man a pocket New Testament that had contained, the New Testament Psalms and Proverbs. And they said, son, if you would just read Proverbs a chapter a day and committed to reading it and applying it, not only will you be well ahead of your peers, but you'll be wiser than any person you'll meet. And really, there is a lot of wisdom in that. If we were to read the Proverbs and really dwell on them and put them into practice, I think we would see how our lives would be, drastically different. It's the reason why the Proverbs are oftentimes the starting book if you need to get into daily Bible reading, because on a month of 31 days, you get a chapter per day, and it builds that habit. So before I went on vacation, I was thinking, there were some things I was thinking about, and I thought, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes has a lot to say about wealth. Its dangers, its benefits, warnings, principles, that kind of thing. So tonight, we're just going to be mainly in the book of Proverbs tonight. There's going to be a couple times we're in Ecclesiastes. But we want to look at just kind of a topical study of what did Solomon have to say about wealth. But Solomon, really, the life of Solomon is the great science experiment of the Bible, right? Here is the one man who was gifted all the wisdom possible, said, you know what, I'm going to try and find out if there is meaning in this life apart from God. I'm going to test it with pleasure. I'm going to test it with industry. I'm going to test it with wealth or whatever it may be. I'm going to find out. I just gave you the summary of Ecclesiastes. There you go, no extra charge. But Solomon really is a great science experiment. And we know the end of the matter is none of it has any meaning to it unless you factor God into the equation. Ecclesiastes 12, the conclusion when all is heard is this: fear God and keep his commandments, for this applies to every person. And so we begin tonight with really the first point we find out in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, that Ecclesiastes, when it comes to our wealth, God needs to come first. In Proverbs, the 3rd chapter, in verse 9, a verse that I quite like, it really summarizes a lot of things, and it has a lot of practical application for us Christians. In Proverbs chapter 3, we'll be looking in verse 9. And it reads, from the Legacy Standard Version of your Bibles, honor Yahweh from your wealth, and from the first of all your produce. Let's continue on verse 10. So your barns may be filled with plenty, and your vats will burst with new wine. Even in our financial dealings, our material dealings, God ought to be the first and foremost factor in those things. And he doesn't get the leftovers. He gets the first fruit, says the Proverbs. That's what also the tithe was in the Old Testament. It wasn't a tenth of whatever you chose. It was the best. It was the first. It was the animals that opened the womb. It was the first of the harvest. God got the best, and he was honored in that way. And sometimes, making a quick application to the New Testament times, as I'm guilty of it, for a long time, my giving was basically, oh no, the collection plate's coming. There. I did my obligation. You know how times have changed because there's no cash in here, there's just receipts. Instead of maybe sitting down and thinking about, okay, here's how much I made this week or this month, whatever. What is a portion that I should give back to my Maker, right? God needs to come first in that. Solomon's also quick to point out that without God, we wouldn't have anything. Our brother Rob Avina just made that point at the table. In Proverbs chapter 10, and the verse will be 22. Proverbs 10 and 22. It is the blessing of Yahweh that makes rich, and he adds no pain with it. Honest wealth, gained honestly, in God-honoring ways, can be a blessing if we've had the acumen and the wisdom to management and deal with it appropriately. I won't say more on the other end because there's going to be some dangers we're going to talk about later tonight. But in Ecclesiastes, kind of the other side of the coin on this idea, in Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 19, furthermore, says Solomon, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to take up his portion and be glad in his labor. This is the gift of God. It's not the only place in Ecclesiastes where he talks about these things, but the idea of both Proverbs and Ecclesiastes that God is the reason why we have anything at all. The clothes on our backs, the food on our tables, whatever we have in our fridges. God's the reason why we even have jobs in which we can be employed to work and gain wealth in order to spend on those things. God is the one who gives all that. And we need to be very attentive that we don't forget that. Because when we forget that, we don't honor God with our wealth and our finances, and then things start getting askew. You know, it's funny. I think it's a biblical principle throughout the text. Can't point to any one place, but when you set priorities right, you put God first in everything, things do work out. And no, that's not prosperity gospel there. I'm not telling you you're going to get a Cadillac. God takes care of his people. Might be beans and tortillas, but he takes care of you. And oftentimes I have found when I'm stressed out, when my life's kind of out of balance, I need to probably relook at some things. I'm like, okay, am I actually putting God first in anything, or am I kind of skimping on the edges somewhere? And along with these same points, Solomon also has to say that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wealth. It's also the beginning of knowledge, but it's also the beginning of wealth. In Proverbs, the 22nd chapter, in verse 4, Proverbs, the 22nd chapter, verse 4. The reward of humility, the fear of Yahweh, is riches, glory, and life. Again, maybe I should start off the lesson with this. So just a quick reminder about Proverbs. They're Proverbs, not promises. In general, this is how it works, but there's always exceptions to that. So, case in point, we all know the proverb, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he's old, he shall not depart from that. Okay, in general, that's how that works, right? But we can all think of exceptions. So in general, yes, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of riches, or the beginning of wealth. But when we don't put God first, and wealth becomes the main focus, they will fail. 100% of the time. If we have set up wealth as our God, which Christians can do, God has a way of ripping out the carpet from underneath us. In Proverbs chapter 11, looking at verse 28, Solomon writes, "He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like the green leaf. In chapter 30, verses 8 and 9, before we make a few comments here, in chapter 30, in verses 8 and 9, keep worthless and every false word far away from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is Yahweh? Or lest I be impoverished and steal and profane the name of my God. Growing up, one of the elders where I was at, and he freely admits this, he's using sermons and Bible classes, so don't think I'm airing dirty laundry. This is where I got this from. Him and his wife had a very successful futon business. They made covers for futons and bean bags and that sort of thing. And they were living the high life. I know down here it's common for everybody to have pools in their backyard. In Oregon, if you had a pool in your backyard that was in-ground, you were rich. That was the cool house, okay? They had the pool in the backyard. They had the RV. They had the sailboat. They did all the vacations, all that stuff. And he would be the first one to tell you, we forgot God on the way up. So he said, one day within a matter of 2 months, a client missed a big payment. I think that's what it was. They started getting behind. Things started getting foreclosed on. Things got repoed, and it all came crashing down. And he told that several times in preaching and teaching, especially on Proverbs, to illustrate the point that even Christians, if we're not careful, you can set your hope on riches, and that be the object of your trust. And Solomon warns us that he who places his trust in riches will fall. So, now the warnings. There's actually quite a bit of warnings in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes about wealth. No surprise there. Get rich quick never works. In Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 11, we read this, and also in 21, but we'll read 13 first. Proverbs 13, and we'll be looking at verse 11. Wealth obtained from empty effort dwindles, but the one who gathers with his hand abounds. And you look in chapter 21 and verse 5. The thoughts of the diligent lead surely to profit, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty. Ramsey Corporation has done the largest study on millionaires in this country. Hundreds of thousands of them. They interviewed them, asked a whole bunch of questions, did all this analysis, and they found out that if you wanted to become a millionaire in this country, no one picked the right stock. No one made the right investment. Only a fraction, I think maybe 5% of them actually inherited any sort of wealth, and most of it was after they had already reached millionaire status, which, by the way, millionaire status is just what your net worth is. So your assets minus your liabilities. If you have a paid-off house, you're probably halfway there. But what they found out was millionaires are really boring people. They're really boring people. They made most of their wealth by investing in their company's retirement fund. They lived on less than what they made. They stayed away from debt. And they did really boring things over a long period of time. I think the median age was 50 by the time they reached that status. So why am I telling you this? Solomon says that the diligent, through persistent, consistent effort, will be wealthy. But the fool who wants to get himself rich quick will come to ruin. Think back a couple years ago when everybody was getting all crazy about GameStop stock. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. But everybody, these young, dumb kids on the internet saw, oh, here's a failing corporation. If we start buying all the stock that artificially brings up the price and we can make money off of it, well, guess what happened? A lot of them lost a lot of money on that. And also, they found out that there's such a thing as capital gains tax. Even if you lost it, you still have to pay money on that. Or Bitcoin. I pray that none of you rode that roller coaster. We see all these get-rich-quick schemes in our society right now, and they all lead in the same place. Financial ruin. That's why Solomon says it doesn't work. If you want something worth having, it's going to take diligence and effort. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 7. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is slave of the lender. This is a very uncomfortable, controversial statement in our culture right now. That debt is slavery. Because what is it? And there's certain debts, mortgages, we get that. You have to take. Very few people have the money to just buy a house in Tucson. But think about it in principle. If I have bought something on a credit card or taken out a loan, I've agreed that, okay, this amount of my monthly income is yours now for X amount of years. I have given a portion of myself, if you will, my finances, over to somebody else's control. Interesting story about Safeway. Even you know why the grocery store chain Safeway is called Safeway? So Safeway was started by a Baptist minister. And back in those days, grocery stores was on credit. You had an account in the store, much like a company store, and you went in, you got the things, and it was on that, and you made payments. Well, wasn't that long ago, about 100 or so years ago, that debt was viewed wholesale as sin. I don't believe the Bible teaches that. But a lot of the old-time preachers viewed it as sin. So this Baptist minister started a grocery store where they only accepted cash because it was the safe way to purchase things. Now, you go down to the local Safeway, they'll take your credit card all day long. But this idea was we're not going to beholden ourselves to somebody else, right? I have Proverbs 6 up here because this is another companion passage. I think it's interesting on this. In Proverbs chapter 6, 1 through 11, well, we're going to start in verse 1. He says, "My son, if you have become a guarantor for your neighbor," the old King James says, if you have signed surety for your neighbor. What does that mean? If you've co-signed for your neighbor on a loan. If you have provided that. If you have struck hands in a pledge for a stranger. If you have been snared with the words of your mouth, you've been caught with the words of your mouth, do this, my son, and deliver yourself, since you have come into the hand of your neighbor. There's an idea. I've signed surety for my neighbor, and now I'm in his power. He says here, go and humble yourself and badger your neighbor. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Go to the ant, O slugger, observe her ways, and be wise, which, having no chief, officer, or ruler, prepares her food in the summer and gathers her provision in the harvest. How long will you lay down, O sluggard, when you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Your poverty will come in like a vagabond, and you will want like an armed man. What's he saying here? He's saying if you have found yourself in debt, here's what you do. Take humility, recognize the situation, and get to work. Now, disclosure statement here. I'm not saying this as a holier than thou. I'm not doing this. I'm the kid in college that, Capital One said, hey, here's a credit card. You want this? And Discover's like, here's a credit card. And then they do this thing where it's like, we raised your limit. I'm like, great. They wouldn't raise my limit unless I could pay for it, right? I was in college. I'm young. Okay? Still clean that up. This is the whole idea, they get you in college, they get you young when you don't have the financial literacy. It's like, why pay now when you can buy it now and pay later at 27.6% interest? And I still remember the first transaction I made on that credit card. You can laugh at this. I did not want to use it. I said, this is for emergencies, this is for emergencies, this is for emergencies. The roommate wanted to go out to dinner. Do you know where we went? Popeyes. $6.70. And that was it. Okay? I'm preaching like this because I know the feeling of what Solomon's talking about in Proverbs 22 and verse 7. For the longest time before I bought my house, the most expensive thing I owned was a piece of paper that said, hey, you took the required courses to get a degree in history. Like, great. There's no value in that. And now I'm up to here in debt. Solomon warns us about this because if it's not managed, if it's not paid attention to, it can spiral out of control. It absolutely can. And the other warning is wealth is temporary. In Proverbs chapter 27, in verse 24, we read this statement that Solomon writes here. For wealth is not forever, neither is a crown from generation to generation. We all know this on some level, right? We all know we can't take it with us. The Egyptian pharaohs tried to, and all they did was make a giant pyramid-shaped piñata for tomb raiders centuries later. That's all they did. Can't take it. Best you can do is be smart with it and use it to bless other people while you're here on this earth. Get a better situation for friends and family. Be generous and help the afflicted and the poor and the needy. Because we can't take it with us. And it cannot satisfy. Going over Ecclesiastes real quick in chapter 5 and verse 10. Solomon writes here, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its produce. This too is vanity. That word vanity there, the Hebrew I'm forgetting it. It means vapor, smoke, temporary, transitory. It's emptiness. Because if you're just chasing the next paycheck, chasing the next dollar, there's always going to be a next one. There's always going to be more overtime. There's always going to be another job. There's always going to be another paycheck, another thing to buy. It doesn't stop if we make it our goal. And these are not all the warnings we have, but we also have some positive instructions and reminders about wealth in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. We are touching this a little bit, so we'll just read chapter 13, verse 4, but diligence and hard work is the key. In Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 4, Solomon writes, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the soul of the diligent is enriched. It's a phrase I heard and I really like it. You know what you need to do when you need more money? It's a surefire scheme that's to work every single time. Get a job. This job thing is a surefire money-making scheme that we all can work here. But diligence and hard work in anything we do in life. That's the key in everything, right? Whether you're a Christian, your job, whatever it is. Diligence and hard work. Note again what he said. The sluggard there in verse 4, the soul of the sluggard craves, it wants, it desires things, but it gets nothing. Why? They're a sluggard. I hate that term. That's a perfect term. It's an ugly word. And I picture this giant fat slug who doesn't want to do anything. If you're a Star Wars fan, Jabba the Hutt. Sits there all day, just has desires for things, but is not motivated enough to even do anything. Meanwhile, he says again, the soul of the diligent is enriched. And we go back to this one. Wealth is not everything. That gets repeated a ton in Proverbs. Because even though Proverbs has a ton to say about how to make wealth and how to manage it and be smart with it and honor God with it, it quickly and always reminds us, but remember, this is not the key of life. This is not the end-all, be-all in your life. In Proverbs 28 and verse 6, let's just read for a reminder once again. Solomon writes here, better is the poor who walks in his integrity than he who is crooked, double dealing, though he be rich. That's not the only statement like this, but the idea in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes is also the fact that it's like, hey, it's better to have a little and quiet and live with virtue and integrity and righteousness than you to have all the world's goods and be a wicked, rotten person inside. Someone's saying it's not everything that is in life. In Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 9, the goal for the Christian, we're not even touched on the New Testament teaching on wealth. There's a lot there. There might be a part 2 next week, maybe. But we do not gain wealth. We do not seek it. We do not accumulate it or grow it for the sake of having more. We do so we can be a blessing to other people. He says in verse 9, he who is generous will be blessed, for he who gives from his food to the poor. Just jot down your minds real quick, 1 Timothy chapter 6. Okay, we are going New Testament real quick, but the Apostle Paul told Timothy, instruct those who are rich in this present life to be rich in good works, sharing with those who have need. Christians are some of the most generous people I've met on this planet. Beyond so. And I've seen time and time again for complete strangers, for the needy, whatever it may be, how willing, truly devoted brethren are to pull on their own pocketbooks to help alleviate the hurt of somebody else. Because we recognize that we don't get to take it with us, and we were blessed so we can bless others. I think to summarize the whole lesson, I go back to chapter 3 and verse 9. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. You read Proverbs and actually apply these principles, we'll be wiser than any person out there today, and probably more than some financial advisors. We don't want to close tonight without talking briefly, and I appreciate your attention this evening. Excuse me. About something that is greater than the wisdom of Solomon. You know, Proverbs, I'm always amazed because you read something, and we covered a lot tonight. Really, Proverbs, you're meant to read one and really just sit and think on it, chew on it. So maybe just take one for this week and memorize it and think on it. And we're always impressed with the wisdom of Solomon, right? There's timeless wisdom in these books. And yet Jesus in his preaching said in Matthew 12 and verse 42 that something greater than the wisdom of Solomon is here, referring to himself. And Jesus said in Matthew 7 verses 19 through 21 that do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal, but rather store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Jesus came to give us the ultimate treasure, the ultimate wealth that is, and that's eternal life with him. You know, he said in Mark 16, verse 16, right before he ascended to heaven, that the one who believes in me and is baptized shall be saved. The one who does not believe in me stands condemned. If you've never done that, there's water ready. We can assist you with that this evening. Perhaps you have in the past and you've wandered away, you need to come home, or you are struggling with some sort of sin, you need encouragement. Now's the time. Won't you come forward as they would stand and sing the song that's been selected?